Thank you very much. I guess that the most of friends and colleagues in this room have heard me speak Romanian enough times, and this is why I would like to switch to English so that the friends and our colleagues who are in Chisinau, we have a communication that is direct and not intermediated by interpreters. Who usually do excellent work, and this is why, if I may, I would switch to English. But we'll definitely have more occasions to talk in Romanian.
Many of you here, I know many of you, and James and I used to have regular beers in the Red Lion pub just across the corner from Chatham House. We should find a similar pub just around the corner from some location in Chisinau, and you have to come more often. And with this opportunity, I'd like to briefly give you an outline of where we are as a country in this new regional context and how this fits into the topic of today, which is talking about the future of the European Union as a whole, but also of Moldova in what we believe is our country and our society's rightful place in this union. So with this, I start by saying that, of course, we all know that we're in a difficult region at a difficult time. And whereas we, of course, cannot compare ourselves with the tragedy that is affecting Ukraine, with the horror that is affecting the people of Ukraine, we nonetheless, in our country, also face a difficult geopolitical context, economic context, and the war is having a major impact on our country, our society, and what we're always saying is that, of course, we're Ukraine's most fragile neighbor. We don't have the degree of resilience and protection than other countries neighboring Ukraine, especially to the west, have. So we've been severely affected by the war and by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We've been affected from the first hours. We've heard explosions here in the morning of the 24th of February, which just gives you a sense of how close geographically this is, but also how close psychologically it is to us, to our society. And of course, the most visible way in which we were affected immediately was the huge wave of refugees. We've had some almost 450,000 people going through Moldova. And currently some 94,000 are staying. At the peak it was 130,000. So today, as we speak, it's 3.5% of our population are still Ukrainian refugees. At the peak it was higher, it was above 4%. Now, if you translate it into numbers from the countries where you come from, you'd get a number, close to 3 million, 2.5 million in the UK for that, or in France. In Germany, that would be the equal proportion of that would be close to 3 million, and that happened in a matter of 2-3 weeks. So if you just compare it to the refugee crisis of 2016, it's like, it's a wave that is several times higher and faster and more dramatic. And of course, we don't have the reserves to deal with such a situation. Now, of half of the remaining refugees, half are minors under 18 years old. So if you look at the statistics of the population of minors in Moldova, you'd see that the refugees from Ukraine are 10% of people under 18-year-old here. So imagine what this would mean for the schooling, the education system, or the healthcare system of any country, be it the UK, or Germany, or France, or Luxembourg, or Liechtenstein. That's, the magnitude and the scale of this is something that no one saw in Europe when it comes to refugee flows. As we speak today, we have 3.5% in Moldova, 2.7% in Poland, 1.9% in Estonia, and then Lithuania 1.8%. So we do remain as by far the most affected proportionally. And that has implications for everything in this country, for policing, for electricity use, for water consumption, for every single little thing in this country needs to be increased by between 3 and 10%. Because in schooling it's 10, in the medical sector it's 10, in policing it's you need to do much more border policing and border patrols, and there's increased risks on a lot of things. So we need to do everything more. As we say this, our resources to do that are shrinking because of the negative economic impact on the war on everyone, including us. But again, if you compare it to the resources we have, the accumulated resources, the prosperity levels, the functionality of institutions, the GDP per capita, we don't even have resources to deal with that other neighbors to the west of Ukraine have. When we talk about the economy and that economic impact, it goes into multiple ways to affect everyone. So, of course, some of the most direct ways is that exports to Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus have been severely affected. That represented around 14% of our exports, which is, allows us a reasonable degree of resilience when it comes to export dependency, and that's in large part thanks to the trade diversification that we did, thanks to our access to the European Union market and DCFTA and the association agreement. So, on the exports front, I think we came to this critical moment in history relatively better prepared than we could have ever imagined. But on imports, we're more affected because we used to import quite a lot of goods through Ukraine and quite a lot of goods through Ukraine, through the port of Odessa, which was the cheapest way to bring goods from the global market into Moldova. With Odessa being closed for trade, we have to rearrange logistical flow. So now you have a situation where the port of Constanța is also quite full, its warehouses are full. So now we're looking into either buying and transporting stuff on land or shipping it to Bulgaria, Romania, queues, borders, time spent in queues. Then, we need, but we also ask Romania and Bulgaria at some point just, to process faster, to hire customs officers. We need to hire customs officers just to accelerate trade. Because everywhere in the region there's an insufficiency of trucks, insufficiency of drivers, queues, costs are going up for everything, for salaries, for fuel, for insurance. So all of that is affecting all of the economies in the region, and we feel it here. Of course, we're also affected when it comes to our security, and here again we're not alone. I don't think there's a single person in Europe that does not feel less secure than 3 months ago. But of course the intensity of that feeling is higher here than elsewhere. And we're very conscious of the risks, and we've been planning and preparing for the full spectrum of risks and contingencies since November. And I'm presumably most of you have followed how we dealt with the refugee flows, but I think the way our institutions and society handled this was just amazing, and it was excellent. And you had the police and border police, everyone just really put up an effort and by the way, for the first week we were completely on our own in this before the first assistance started coming in. And our institutions were ready, and our society was ready to do that. And there was an explicit societal, but also political decision and readiness just to open the doors of the country, almost irrespective of what documents you have, the doors of houses of our people. And by the way, another piece of statistics is that more than 90% of refugees are housed in private accommodations, not in refugee centers, not in tent cities, but in people's homes. So that was truly an all-of-a-society approach. But coming back to insecurity, part of the reason as to why this response was reasonably efficient was that we've been preparing for it since around November. And that means several things. We've checked, where could we house refugees? Does the electricity wiring, is it good enough? Can you heat those places? Are the windows closing? Because, in winter. So there was, and that was not public at the time, but we've been preparing for it. So when it comes to security, I can tell you that we've been factoring in the full spectrum of risks from our country from already autumn. At the same time, and we also say this publicly, we don't see Moldova at this stage as of today as being a potential target of hostile military activity in the nearest future. We don't know how the situation will evolve, we cannot predict, we cannot speculate, and as I said, we've been preparing for the full spectrum of contingencies. But as we speak, our assessment, which is also shared by our partners, is that in the immediate future, we don't see Moldova as being a risk of targeted, imminent, immediate military activities, which of course, given how the situation evolved in recent months in the region, is something that we say that is valid today. But of course, we're all watching very closely the development of the war in Ukraine. And of course, a lot depends on how the war stops, when it stops, and how it stops. And this we don't know. Having said this, of course, you've seen that the situation inside the Transnistrian region is a potential source of tensions, there were explosions, and the risks are there. Yes. Now, a couple of words about the foreign policy response to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We've condemned the aggression within the first hours. We've stood with the international community in most international fora to vote, align, declare, co-sponsor, and make an explicit and clear take an explicit diplomatic stance on against this aggression. So we've co-sponsored the resolution in the United Nations General Assembly. We've voted for the exclusion from the EBRD, etc., etc. There's really many actions, and we've aligned with EU statements in a lot of fora, in the OSCE, in the UN. De facto, an important part of the sanctions regime is de facto being applied in Moldova, primarily in the financial and banking sector. At the same time, our assessment of the degree of resilience of our country is that it's difficult to maintain socioeconomic stability here while also do the full spectrum of while joining the full spectrum of responses to the war against Ukraine. As we speak, that has taken much of our time in the last 3 months, but that only made us even more certain and more sure that we need to make sure that this effort of handling and managing the situation does not entirely consume all the political and administrative energy of the government. So we've been consciously and more making sure that we do continue with the reforms process, and we actually double down on reforms, and that it's even more important than ever. So we've been making progress on the justice reform and anti-corruption, and I have colleagues here who run this effort every day, and we're like very active on pursuing and working with our international partners on justice reform, on anti-corruption, on the law on pre-vetting has passed through. We're setting up together with the EU delegation the right mechanisms to make this right, and our hope is that, so we're advancing on that. And of course, the most symbolic and hopefully practical process that we've launched in recent months is this application to join the European Union, which we did on the 3rd of March. But that also came embedded in multiple processes where we've been intensifying our integration with the European Union, and that's not always as visible in the news, but all of it is public, but you never know how news cycles work. But since forming the government in August, we've managed to accomplish quite a number of things. One of the key elements was we launched finally with the EU a high-level dialogue on political and security issues, which we did in March, but of course there was a lot of preparation for that since autumn. So now we have an institutional vehicle to deepen our political cooperation. Of course, this all rests on on a very solid foundation of what we believe is Moldova's already strong integration into the European economy. And here we're one of the countries that is most linked and integrated into the European economy thanks to DCFTA and the association agreement, but also thanks to our geography. And on this, our level of integration with the EU market has been higher even before the war than other countries in the Eastern Partnership. We've also been cooperating very well, and we've prepared the ground for cooperating with the EU and benefiting from significant EU assistance under the European Peace Facility, which is this initiative launched last year, designed to turn the EU into a more influential global and regional player. So we do have a lot of practical projects. And on the front of our EU aspirations, as you know, we received the first part of the questionnaire and then the second part, and we've responded to the first part, and in a few days we're responding to the second part, and that's truly been an amazing effort where our institutions, our civil society, our diaspora friends, some other friends, I'm not sure if it's the right thing to say, but of course that was public. Also Romania has helped us prepare our responses to the questionnaire, and in a few days we'll send the second set of responses to the questionnaire that is designed to assess to what degree Moldova is ready to making the next steps towards joining the European Union. And as you know, there's a lively debate inside the EU as to what is the right thing to do now and how does this fit into EU aspirations for itself and for other countries, and we're trying to be an active participant on that front. And some of the things we constantly stress is that in our mind it's very important for the next rounds of EU enlargement as such, but also for the next rounds of making the EU more stronger, but also more integrated with those countries that want to do that. It's very important to base EU decisions on meritocracy. And what we've seen in the last 20 years is that there was this logic where the general structuring of EU enlargement planning was that first we do the Balkans, then let's see, maybe yes, maybe no. That was the basic policy. What happened with the questionnaire, and it was handed to us in Luxembourg, I think it was the 21st of March, was it? No, maybe. What happened with this questionnaire, it's the first time in the country, in the history of Moldova and in the history of Moldova's European aspirations, that EU integration is no longer just a unilateral aspiration of Moldova, it's something we do together with the European Commission and the EU member states. So this is what happened in the last weeks, where the European integration project is a shared endeavor, and we need to get this right. But as we do that, we also say that this logic that first the Balkans, then let's see, actually is not based on meritocracy. It's based on a geographic criteria, and you cannot exclude geography from this, and you cannot exclude geopolitical preferences and urgencies, but you cannot exclude meritocracy entirely either. And here in Moldova, we do believe that we've proved, and our society has proved in the last 30 years, changing governments constantly through elections, having a constant commitment to being governed under democratic rules. And as you know, in Moldova, you had several attempts to derail democratic governance and enforce and enforce either authoritarian political systems or oligarchic political systems. Every time Moldovan society said no and voted for pro-European forces. So we do believe that if you look at the degree of democratic consolidation and commitment and state functionality and alignment to EU foreign policy priorities, to EU values, to EU geostrategic aspirations, we are certainly not worse than significant parts of the Balkans. And if you do use the meritocratic lens to look at what does the EU need to do next, we think it's only fair for this process to include some Balkan countries, but also a country like ours, which is not scoring worse and often scores better on this criteria, if we are to assess the degree of readiness to take the next steps. Having said that, we all know it's a long process, we don't want shortcuts, and the only way to get into the EU is for us to do the homework. The second kind of contextual question, and I'll stop here in a minute, maybe 1.5 minutes, because I have 2 bullets, is to kind of, I get this question is, oh, did the war change, and did you plan to apply? Yes, of course the war changed. European integration is a response to war. Schumann's speech was done around the 5th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. The whole European project is about responding to war on the European continent, quickly. Wars galvanized the next steps of European integration. Greece, Spain, Portugal joined the EU a few years after the collapse of their authoritarian regimes, depending, 5, 6, 7, 8, less than 10. We've had 30 years of democracy, imperfect, unconsolidated, 30 years of democracy. Europe and European integration and enlargement is a response to wars, to collapse of authoritarian regimes, to the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Finland, Austria, Sweden joined the EU after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the wall of the Berlin Wall. Thessaloniki, the EU perspective for the Balkans, was given as a response to a decade of wars in the Balkans. When the EU understood and decided that, after Bosnia, we couldn't stabilize the region, there was the war in Kosovo, and if we want these wars to stop, we need to give an EU accession perspective to the Balkans. This is what is the Thessaloniki summit agenda. This is the story of the stabilization and association process for the Balkans. The promise of enlargement is a response to war and authoritarianism. And it's only logical that in this context, the right response is to do the same. That's why the EU exists. Is my interpretation of why the EU exists. And in this, as we speak about it, yes, war forces on leaders questions of historical nature. Yes, we can talk about article here, comma there, but it's wars that focus people's minds. And this is when leaders, societies need to make choices. And that's why it is important, as we speak about the next weeks, and we're sending the questionnaire, also to be very conscious of it. Because for us, the choice is clear. We have, and I've said this publicly, but we have a European history, a European identity, a European society, a European language. Even our Romanian language is an official language of the EU, so students who write their MA thesis on the European Union don't even need to translate the acquis communautaire. Our friends from the parliament, Mihai and Doina, are here. We don't even need to translate the acquis communautaire. It's as easy as it gets linguistically. And in our minds, the choice is there, but we need to turn this choice into an institutional reality with the help of the EU, of the member states. That's what the next weeks and months will be about. And that is why it's very important now for all of us to realize the historical task that we all have and to make sure that in the next weeks and months, Moldova makes these next steps to the place where it belongs. And that place is the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone. Mic. Microphone. Microphone. Sorry for that. One knows that I'm from radio. I couldn't switch on a microphone. All right. I was introduced as a journalist. That's why I will be the advocate of journalists, and I will start immediately with some questions, if Mr. Groza allows me. He allowed me actually to prove that I listen carefully the speech of the minister, and I have questions by sections. So my name tag fell down. It's bad. I was fired from Europe. All right. So let me ask you, if when you talk about refugees, look, this is a technical question, but interesting nonetheless. There are refugees who remain in Transnistria or not? Second question is, how many? And the second would be whether, look, if I recall the declaration of Moscow, that when they were in full war, they have nothing against European aspirations of Moldova, and then somehow this disappeared, and then they had someone who said that they need a corridor to Transnistria, that general from Russia said, and then we remember that during a demonstration rally at the embassy, they said, well, make it so that we don't hear the noise of rallies. Look, let me ask you, if you have exercised diplomatically pressures to join Nebenza, or the diplomatic discourse, that is, I wouldn't qualify, but I think was very much quite abhorrent. And then, did you overcome the situation when the Kiev thought that said that Chisinau is actually getting on a train, on the same train, because it is Ukraine's train, and Mr. Groza with Sorin Ionita, they had this roundtable, and Mr. Groza and Sorin Ionita were saying that actually Moldova is more prepared than Ukraine. But formally, they started on that train. They were the diesel and the engine, and then Chisinau came along. There was a ping pong between Ukraine and Moldova. Did you overcome the situation? Is this situation exhausted or not? Thank you. To start with the last question. Your relations with Ukraine, they have been complex at all times, but now the situation is very clear. When it comes to your question, today I had an exchange of messages with my colleague Kuleba to see what's our joint response to the statement made by Macron yesterday, the initiative of Mr. Macron about political union of European Union political union. So he called it political union of the EU. So we coordinated our positions. At the end of this week, there will be a union of G7, of the ministers of foreign affairs of G7 near Hanover, Germany, which will be organized. There will be a panel dedicated to Ukraine and Moldova. And myself and Mr. Kuleba will be there, and we'll discuss with our colleagues from G7 about the best ways to help our countries in this regard. And our positions, formal positions, the response to French initiative, they're very similar. And Ukraine made this position public. I will make it public on behalf of Moldova. For sure, we insist and we hope that we will advance on our traditional path of joining EU, the way we want it and the way we will move towards EU, the current pathway, according to the standard roadmap, candidate implementation of acquis, any initiative which runs in parallel allows us to strengthen, intensify our links, political, economic links with the EU is welcome. So as long as we join traditionally, as well as co-participation by identifying new ways, including a potential European political union, which will include current member states, but also states as Moldova and other states. For us, this is a way to anchor Moldova more firmly And in this regard, of course, we want to participate in the discussions and development of these details, but for us, these initiatives, they go into the right direction of complementing each other. Complementing and specifying the track, the traditional pathway, complemented with other initiatives, would be interested to deepen our EU integration in the commercial economic areas, to have access to those four freedoms of the EU. We've been speaking about it. We want to integrate into the roaming space of the EU. We don't want quotas for our, commodity transport. We want to integrate into banking, post services. We want to be able to make transfers through SEPA, through Single European Payments System. Any initiative which is related, which is practical, and which intensifies our links with the EU. Not at the expense, but in addition to the traditional pathway towards accession. In this regard, Macron's initiative is, in our view, an initiative which allows us to develop new channels of integration of Moldova within the area, the values of the EU, digital, economic, cyber, etc. And I gave you the answer to the questions. We, with Ukraine, coordinate these positions. And yes, there were statements, they are overcome. You know that in Moldova as well, there are nuances of communication which differ, and then Ukraine also has its own way of communicating, and we have a very good relation with Ukraine. We coordinate certain positions, including, I gave you the example today, that's why I gave you these details, because we have a dialogue which functions. We exchange messages. So, when it comes to alignment and speeches, we have a mechanism of alignment to taking positions with the EU only. At the same time, oftentimes different countries invite us to different conferences and in this regard, indeed, Russian Federation invites us to certain initiatives of Russia, including at the UN. But this is not by many other countries. US invites us, Turkey invites us. So that is a standard arrangement where someone organizes a conference, a working group, a panel discussion, and then at the level of ambassadors, they decide, do you align it yourself or not? Do you participate or not? But the mechanism of alignment and taking positions in foreign policy, we only have it with the EU. And we are invited to align and take positions in this regard. This mechanism, of course, it reflects the political mandate and aspirations that we received from the citizens of Moldova. Can you monitor that? Well, look, we cannot, because you know that the border in Ukraine, in Transnistria, was closed. So a lot of citizens or refugees from Ukraine came to Moldova. Who of them went to Transnistria or are on the right bank? We don't have institutional mechanisms to know for sure. Probably there's a certain number because they're relatives. I don't think that this number is big. That is my assessment.